I grew up in a basement that had been flooded and not remediated. So we know I had toxic mold, and I had these chronic nosebleeds, like sometimes 5-6 times a day. Just my nose just start bleeding. It was really irritating. But this is a classical sign of mold exposure. Frequent bruising for no reason, stretch marks that developed for apparently no reason. I wasn't getting very fat as a kid, but I'm just riddled with stretch marks around my midsection. And if people don't believe that, I was in Men's Health with my shirt off and abs. And if you look closely, like there's the stretch marks, they're still there. They just fade with time. Whether that's something that is very hard to hack, I've looked into that. Not that I'm worried about the cosmetics. I'm just like, how do I achieve victory over those things that have been here since I was 14 or something? And what was going on there was toxic mold, or just any mold, its mortal enemy is bacteria. That's why penicillin comes from mold. In fact, most antibiotics do. So our cells are powered by ancient bacteria, and molds make toxins to kill bacteria, including ancient ones. So there was a war going on inside my cells because of the environment that I was in. And I've done a documentary. It's called Moldy Movie. Mark is in it. And moldymovie.com, free screening, check it out. But here's the deal. 100 million homes have this problem. And if you want to not get old, you want to have a brain that works, you need to not live in toxic mold. And it affects different people differently because of these weird cellular pathways. I also, it turns out, had high mercury and lead levels that I diagnosed in my 20s. Likely, I got them when I was younger. My parents owned a gold mine, believe it or not. They co-owned it with 5 other families. That sounds really swanky. I lived in New Mexico, and that meant we had a couple hundred acres where we would go dig holes on weekends. But I was exposed to mercury through that, which was probably more of an effect than we would have known at the time. And so I had those going on. I also had chronic sinus infections every month for 15 years, and I took antibiotics every month for that because that's what the doctors told me, not recognizing that chronic strep throats and sinusitis are purely symptoms of toxic mold exposure. So now I've ruined my gut bacteria, both by living in a toxic house and by taking antibiotics that keep knocking them down over and over. I developed all kinds of autoimmunity. I had arthritis diagnosed in my knees when I was 14. And I just started gaining weight no matter what I did. And I would exercise. I would try to change how I would eat. I would do all these things, and you start to feel like a failure because I'm doing everything right. By the time I was 20, I had my first knee surgery. I had 3 knee surgeries on one of my knees because it would just collapse when I would walk. I mean, I was pretty damn sick. And then I went into, metabolic disorders, prediabetes, medical blood tests showing high risk of stroke and heart attack before I'm 30. And it just went on and on. And here it is the whole time I'm saying, I thought I was doing the right thing. And it was when I got really serious, I'm like, screw this noise. Everything I've done that the doctors have told me to do and regular magazines and things, it hasn't worked. And it's not that I didn't do it. It isn't that I didn't try hard enough. It's that it actually didn't work. It was bad advice. And what broke the camel's back is I went into the doctor and I said, I don't know what's going on here. I just moved into a condo that turns out has Stachybotrys in the bedroom, which is the worst of the worst toxic molds. It's just disabling. And all of my symptoms came back that I thought I was done with. And I put on 30 pounds in about a month and a half. I'm just like, what's going on? And I feel like I'm hungover all the time, not understanding all of this. I said, well, doctor, vitamin C seems to make me feel better. And he said, well, how much are you taking? I said, well, I take 3 grams a day, and I feel like I get a little bit of a lift from that. And he said, you have to stop. It could kill you. Mm-hmm. And I looked at him and I said, what about Linus Pauling? Linus Pauling, 2 Nobel Prizes, 90 grams of vitamin C a day. And the doctor looks at me and goes, Linus who? And I looked at him and I said, you're fired. And I'd never paid him. It went on my credit report for 7 years, but I never paid him because I'm like, I'm not spending my hard-earned money on your shitty advice. And I was actually really angry at the medical profession. I'm married to a doctor now, for a while, until I finally said, all right, I actually have diagnosed myself. I have one of these 7 things going on. And I looked and I found what we would now call a functional medicine doctor. And I went in and I said, I don't know what it is, but I think it's in this order. I want this lab test from this lab and this treatment plan, if that's what it is. And she's like, wow, okay, you've done your homework. Why don't we start with the one that I think is most likely, and we'll do some lab tests for that. And then I was like, oh, thank God, someone who will believe me, who doesn't look at me and say, oh, sure, you're exercising every day. Sure, you want a low-fat diet. You're eating Snickers bars. You probably have a car full of them. That was the treatment I was getting. So I think the medical profession has become much better and healthier and more able to listen to people. And when you go to the functional medicine side, that's all that you have to do is sit down and spend that first hour listening, and you learn so much.
And that was the start of you spending $1 million on biohacking your own self and body?
I was pretty pissed.
Yeah. So you talked about these 7 items that were there. Take us to that appointment and some of the first things. What was one of the first labs that came back and the things that you started to notice that this doctor came back to you and showed you that was going on?
The doctor said, you have Lyme disease. And I said, well, okay, I've certainly been bitten by a lot of ticks. As a kid growing up in New Mexico, spending time in the forest, or more likely the desert, that just happens. But I never had any rash. And I said, all right, let's try the antibiotics for that. It didn't work. It made things worse. And I did a lot more research, though, and I started understanding, okay, Lyme disease and toxic mold go really well together. And to this day, 80% of people who think they have Lyme disease actually have toxic mold exposure, because you will get better from Lyme disease most of the time if you are not simultaneously exposed to toxic mold.
Because toxic mold is like a constant suppression on your immune system.
Exactly.
Your body's trying to, have the best immune system possible, and the mold is constantly just beating it down.
Something like 90 to 95% of people listening to the show, if you were to look for Lyme DNA in their urine, they have it. It's present in their body. It's just not doing anything because your immune system works. It's when something takes out the immune system that the Lyme gets to be a lot stronger.
Similar to like a lot of people get diagnosed with H. pylori. I think like 60% of the population has it according to the stats that are out there. But then the question always in functional medicine is that, is it expressing itself, or can you just live with it? Right?
Yeah, it's not causing any harm. And what was going on with me, and what since then I've had guests on Bulletproof Radio who've done the genetic expression differences to show the slight difference between toxic mold and Lyme, and that most of the time it is toxic mold. So they also tested me. The time they didn't test me for toxic mold, they tested me for Candida. And that was on my list. It turns out Candida and toxic mold have a lot of similarities. Candida is a yeast in the fungal species. And there was another doctor who said, well, Dave, this is weird. He said, my patients get better. This is a guy who was a Johns Hopkins ENT surgeon, quit his practice. He said, I do surgery on people's sinuses. They don't get better. I'm done. So he became an acupuncturist, a naturopath, even a homeopath, which is, as a computer scientist, like the least likely thing for me to believe. And he's though very credible. And I said, all right, you try your stuff. I'll take whatever drops you want. I also suspend my disbelief. And it didn't work. None of the stuff. I mean, some of it actually helped. Glutathione intravenously helped. The metal chelation he did helped. But finally he sat me down and he said, Dave, I haven't really seen this before, but you're not getting better. I don't understand it because all the things that should work aren't working. I want to run an AIDS test. And he says, I don't think you have it, but I cannot explain your immune suppression. It's so weird. So we ran it. I didn't have HIV and didn't have AIDS, obviously. But he did run an allergy test that showed I was allergic to 8 of the top 10 species of toxic mold. So now we have a smoking gun that I have lived in houses that had toxic mold. And I'm like, oh, this makes so much sense. And all the pieces came together and you look at what it does. It disables systems in the body, the same systems that get disabled as you age. So for me, I was treated to early onset aging with the cognitive problems, chronic fatigue syndrome, which is something I'm just too tired to get out of bed sort of thing, the joint pain, the muscle pain, I don't know why I put my car keys in the fridge kind of stuff, all of it. And I don't have it anymore, but I know what it's like.
So mold was really like one of the first pillars for you.
Yep.
That you went down. So let's link that into the 7 pillars of aging that you referenced earlier. So zombie cells, mitochondrial mutations, shrinking tissues, these come straight from your book, cellular straitjackets, and extracellular junk. So which one of these does mold affect?
Every single one of them.
So let's just start off with the first one, shrinking tissues.
Well, as we age, we actually run out of stem cells and we have less tissue. So you've seen older people where they have very thin skin. And this is because your collagen replacement rate goes down over time unless you do something about it. And you have something called sarcopenia, muscle loss. And part of this is you used up the stem cells you had. And part of this is other changes that happen with aging. So when people are exposed to toxic mold, they tend to lose muscle and gain a lot of fat. They get fat the way I was fat, surprisingly. So you will see striated muscle where there's a lot of fat in the muscle, and you'll see actually inability to put on muscle because of chronic inflammation. And so that's one of the ones where people who are chronically exposed to any kind of poison like that, their body simply won't be able to synthesize protein because it's too busy making enzymes to try and detoxify. And then you get into these other ones. One of my favorite ones is the cellular straitjackets. And a lot of people have heard of amyloid plaque because they say, oh, that's what causes Alzheimer's disease. It's a symptom of Alzheimer's disease. And what amyloids are throughout the body are essentially cellular level calluses or scar tissue from chronic inflammation. So we all know if you do something, you have a bad knee or a bad elbow or something like that, it gets scar tissue and it just doesn't work as well as it did before. If you are doing things, whether it's being in a toxic mold environment, eating tons of things that expose you to toxic mold, like even fish, not toxic mold, that expose you to toxic metals, or you're getting terrible sleep, you're eating a lot of sugar, you're eating fried food, you're smoking, you're drinking, all of those things cause chronic inflammation, which itself is caused by a decline in your cell's ability to take food and air and turn them into energy. And when there's chronic inflammation, it will create these plaques. And over the course of decades, your cells become less flexible. And when they're less flexible, they're less functional. When they're less functional, you start to go down that decline of aging.
And the plaque is, there's a lot of different thoughts on it, but in a way it's less, it's more of a reaction. It's like a survival mechanism. It's not the problem. The plaque is sort of part of this thing, but the question is always like, what is your body trying to survive?
Yes.
Right?
And this isn't the kind of plaque inside your arteries we're talking about, just for people listening. This is an amyloid plaque, it's called. So basically these are cross-linked proteins in your cells that wouldn't have been there had there not been chronic inflammation. And autoimmunity is a major trigger. It's something where your body gets inflamed by things in your own body. And if you have that going on, which I did, I was diagnosed with Hashimoto's in my mid-20s, which is when your immune system attacks your thyroid gland. You end up with even more of these plaques throughout your body. So your job is, how do I turn off inflammation? And if I can do that via almost any mechanism, and usually food is at the core of it, food and sleep and things like that, you will actually live longer because you'll have less of these plaques. That's one of the 7 pillars of aging that you've just hacked. And
your story involves mold, but it's not a book about mold.
No,
it's really you're
not
using
at all.
that example as an example of these different factors in our life that can trigger these big killers that are out there. These chronic diseases for individuals.
Mold for me triggered early onset aging.
Right.
I had all these things that you're supposed to get when you're 60 or 70 in my late teens and 20s. And so it provided an opportunity for me to figure out how to hack them, or as I like to say, to die trying, because there was nothing more important than that. So I'm not going back. That's why I wrote Superhuman. You don't have to go there. Trust me, you don't want to go there.
So zooming out a little bit, you on your journey ended up at this functional medicine doctor. You started digging in and you started piecing together something that Linus Pauling really started loudly talking about in his later years, which is this idea of systems-based biology.
Yes.
Sorry, go ahead.
I'm just agreeing with you. It's so good you said that. Keep going.
So functional medicine, which Dr. Hyman and many other people practice out there, and they have a little bit, it's an integrative medicine too, and there's different methodology that are out there. It's all based on this idea of systems-based biology coined by Linus Pauling, the idea that you can't separate the body into these isolated organs that just operate on their own. You can't just see a cardiologist if you want to look at your heart health. You have to think about, how does your microbiome in your mouth affect it, because the bacteria can end up in your heart. You have to think about how your gut bacteria affects your brain, that you are bigger than just these individual organs. You are an entire system. So was that the first time for you working with this practitioner that you saw intuitively what I know, somebody's actually helping me see that all these systems are being affected?
It's funny. Linus Pauling was the father of orthomolecular medicine, which was the name for functional or integrative medicine before we had that name. So this is the people who knew Linus were the people I was interviewing and interacting with at the anti-aging nonprofit. And And in fact, the very first practitioners that I found were orthomolecular, and now that's a word that you don't see as commonly used anymore. And functional is more systems based. But you're right, Linus Pauling was the first guy to really talk about that systems biology. And you'll see the Institute for Systems Biology at major universities now, where we're realizing that, wow, we're not meat robots. But keep in mind, my grandmother's a nuclear engineer. Grandfather's a PhD chemist. I'm a computer science guy. My whole family is engineers. So I had that mindset, not a medical mindset, but a meat robot mindset, where we're just a collection of parts, right? All the consciousness that you have is just thoughts in your brain, right? And it's purely resonant there. And there's no such thing as a field effect. Your brain doesn't do anything outside the body. You pull your heart out and put a pump in there, and it's exactly the same thing. And this is complete bullshit. That is not how the body works. It's an incredibly complex system with individual localized nodes of awareness and consciousness inside your cells. And each cell has its own awareness and consciousness. And they're stupid, and they run tiny little decision-making things. But when you roll that up millions of times a second times quadrillions of cells, you get these amazing automatic behaviors that then you feel guilty about. And they're usually, I wanted to punch that guy, I wanted to eat that donut, and I wanted to have sex with that person. And you're going, geez, that's everything I've ever done that I'm ashamed of, rolled up. And it's all subcellular activities. So how are you going to say, based on that, oh, consciousness is just in the brain and we're just meat robots and you can pull one part out, you can pull another part out? That's not how it works. And it's so provable that there's a book from a guy who did organ transplants for most of his career. And I'll probably think of its name in a minute. And he says, you know what? I didn't want to write about this till I was done doing surgeries because they would have taken my medical license. But here's what I found. When I take an organ from one person and I put it in another person, that person will take on characteristics of the person whose organ they got. And he tells the story of a cowboy who gets the heart of a 20-year-old woman. And suddenly this 50-year-old cowboy is taking scented bubble bath after his surgery. And his family's like, what is wrong with you? And he's like, I don't know. I just want to do it. Right? So it is a complex distributed system. And it is so stupid to say, I am just a kidney specialist and I only look at that, when you don't look at why is the kidney inflamed. It's part of a system. And the scary thing, and the thing that gives me the most hope, is we know very well that the system of our bodies does not end at our skin, and it does not end even 1 foot or 10 feet away from you. We can measure the magnetic field that comes off your heart multiple feet away from you. And we know its shape and we know the direction of the current flow. This is a real thing. We know it's tilted 8 degrees to the left. So there is a field effect that humans all have. In fact, you can measure the effect on other people from someone who has a highly coherent heart rate. You can measure the effect of a human heart rate on a horse that they haven't touched, because the horse's heart rate will change to match the human's. So we know that, and we know that the environment around us changes our biology. So whether you walk through a forest, there is something in Superhuman about natural killer cells. I've had my blood extracted, cultured for 6 weeks. They grew billions of natural killer cells and injected them back in, which they go through and they hunt down zombie cells and they hunt down precancerous cells and they remove them with extreme discretion. So I gave myself a 20 or younger nervous system. Okay, that's an expensive treatment that is usually only done for people who have cancer or something. This wasn't about cancer. This was just about having a young immune system. Well, there's another way to raise your natural killer cells by 20%. It's called going for a walk in an evergreen forest. And I found a study about Hiroki spruce essential oils. And those oils are shown in a study to raise your natural killer cells by 20%. So maybe $20 worth of essential oils might be worth sprinkling on your pillow sometimes. Or maybe you should go for a walk in a forest. But if you think that the system of your biology ends at your body, you are wrong. The world around you programs you way more than you know it. So the only logical thing you can do is you can start to affect the world around you so it will affect you the way you want it to be. And that starts with not polluting stuff. And it starts with being nice to people around you, because they're more likely to be nice to you back and to other people. And it starts with making sure everyone around you is well fed, because people who eat the right foods are nicer to each other. Guess how long you'll live if you're surrounded by nice people versus angry people? You'll live longer. Like, you win when you fix the world around you.
It's so true. And, you know, you've divided the book into like how to avoid the things that are like affecting you. An example, you talked about like mold or repair the damage.
Yep.
And then you've also gone into like a whole section of things that you can add in to like completely level up. And we're not going to go too much into food because we talk a lot about food in this podcast, and we talked about a lot about food in our last interview in the brain and everything that. Anybody who wants to listen to that, you can go back and listen to that podcast. But just like you mentioned, these natural killer cells. What are some of the other technologies that you're focused on right now that are related to longevity?
Well, I'm not going to talk about bulletproof coffee and ketones because we've talked about it before, right? But it's massively important that you look at ketones and that you don't eat sometimes. And I've talked a little bit about intermittent fasting, and the first book, the Bulletproof Diet book, really helped to put that on the radar. And there's so much new research has come out in the last 5 years. So part of this is sometimes don't eat, which is different than talking about food. But the other one is light. Circadian biology. Our knowledge in the last 8 years has just changed dramatically for this. So you'll see I'm wearing these cool yellow glasses. These are made by TrueDark. It's a company that I founded, and there's actually a couple different patents with my name on them around manipulating the color of light that comes into your eyes. It's not just blue blocking, it goes beyond that. And I've been able to measurably double my deep sleep if I use the glasses designed for sleep by TrueDark. And if you want to really function well, fixing your sleep is one of the biggest things you can do. So I talk about the technology of doing that, and I also talk about light therapy. If you'd like to have skin that maintains its elasticity and doesn't get super thin over time, you can use red and infrared and even amber light therapy. You can spend a few minutes every now and then shining a light on your face or on your body that has incredible systemic effects, including on the microbiome, on your bone density, on your testosterone levels in men, on your progesterone levels in women, just from light on your skin. And people don't know that. So maybe in the morning when you're drinking your coffee, you might want to have some light therapy. Is that going to radically change how you feel 20 years from now and how you look? Actually, it probably will. And it's not very expensive because you buy a light therapy device and you can use it every day for free.
I've been using the TrueDark glasses. Your team was kind enough to send some over to us, so thank you for that.
Did you notice the difference?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Okay. I know you have different versions. There's ones you can wear like for like computer glasses.
Yeah, that's what I'm wearing now. Yeah.
There's ones you can wear that are like mid sort of ones.
The sunsets. Yeah.
And then like evening ones. And I saw you were rocking a few ones on the flight. Those were like the really dark ones, right?
I wore those flying to London. And I flew from Vancouver to London. So that's the worst jet lag you can get. And my Oura Ring showed I got 2 hours of deep sleep on the airplane, which is incredible because most 20-year-olds don't get 2 hours of deep sleep in 8 hours. And I wore those glasses for 2 hours before I boarded the plane. And I wore them when I was on the plane until I went to sleep. And for me, they're like Valium or noise canceling headphones for my eyes. And there's good science behind that, but it's not just blocking blue. It's blocking all of the things that, get this, 10 years ago, we didn't even understand that 5% of the cells in your retina, they collect light, but you can't see the light because it goes around the optic nerve into the timing system of the brain. So we just, what colors do those cells care about? Let's block those colors. And we did that, and I tricked my brain into thinking I was sitting in pitch black darkness, even though I could still watch a movie.
Fascinating. You know, when you were on the podcast last time, you said something really key. You were like, people always ask you, like, what supplements do I take? And you said, what I take now is made for my body, the insults that I went through, the genes that I have, the things that I go through. And I could tell you, and you do talk about some of that, but you need to figure out what's right for you. And also you need to figure out what place in your journey you're in. Because if you're overwhelmed and you think that you have to do everything perfect and you have to do everything right, you're going to quit before you start because you're just judging yourself all the time for not making progress. So when you talk about all these different things that are the tools in people's toolbox that are out there, how do we teach people prioritization of experimentation?
There's it's one of the first two chapters in Superhuman. We talk about return on investment, and it's teaching you how to think about that. And return on investment has a couple things. It's what are the returns you're looking for, and what are you investing? And I will argue very passionately that there's only one thing you ever invest, and it's energy. You do not invest time or money, because if you have plenty of energy, then time becomes valuable. But if you have no energy, time is useless. And if you have no time, money is useless. And if you have no energy, money is useless. So it turns out energy is what allows you to create time and use time, and energy is what allows you to create money. So then now you're saying, okay, how much work is it for me to do this thing that's going to make me live longer? And you could say, well, that costs $100 a month. I don't want to invest that right now because it takes too much energy to make $100 right now, and I don't need that benefit. But you could also say, I feel like crap all the time. I'm in constant pain. And if I spend $100 a month, the pain goes away. And then it's worth it because it gave me energy back, right? So energy now is what you're investing in first. And when you have so much of that, you start saying, wow, I think I'm going to start investing for the future. And use energy as the lens of what you're investing and what you're getting back. And you might say, actually, what I really wanted was abs. I have enough energy. And that's cool. Your return is measured in abs. And then you adjust your investment of energy, time, and money in those things. So you just have to think about that and just say, you know what? There is an infinite amount of technology and things that you could do. I have $1 million lab at my house full of anti-aging technologies, full of recovery technologies. We opened Upgrade Labs here in Santa Monica where you can go in and use this stuff. I have a problem. I could spend 8 hours a day at my house using recovery technologies. Do you think I do that? No. So the challenge for Upgrade Labs was, how do I figure out how to create the best path through this stack of technology? So when someone walks in the door, I can say, what do you want? And where are you right now? Do this, do this, do this. And that's going to give you the highest returns in the least possible amount of time. You have to look at what you do that way, whether it's entertainment, whether it's what you put on your plate, or whether it's an anti-aging technology. It's always that way of thinking.
One shout out that I want to give you from this really did come directly from you, is that I've been eating and focusing on my diet and health and everything for pretty much since like the year 2000, when I realized that dairy was causing an inflammatory effect and was leading to my very like cystic acne that I had at the time. And so I've paid attention. I put a lot of effort and energy into that, cleaned up my diet. I never dealt with weight issues, right? But I had my own health issues. My acne cleared up in a couple months, and that led to a lot of other improvements and advancements. But the one thing was, every so often, every once every year and a half, I would still get like sick. I had a lot of chronic sinus stuff when I was a kid, and I had strep throat and other things like that. I've done all the mold things. I tested my house for mold, got the mycotoxin test, other stuff. And one time I heard you in an interview say that basically talking about fried food and how damaging it was. Yeah. And I don't eat fried food regularly, even like that often, but every so often, like maybe every 3 months, I would be out with some friends and somebody would order like sweet potato fries, right, or something else that's fried, and you're going for like an experience. And almost immediately when I started looking at that, after I heard you talking about it, I noticed how quickly it would change the inflammation in my mouth and my throat. Yes. And then usually within a few days I would get sick. Yeah. And I cut out fried foods completely from my diet, and I made that a priority, and I haven't had anything fried in at least 2 years now, and I have not gotten sick.
It's so cool that you noticed that. And the crazy skill that I have is in the tech world, we call it event correlation. And it's just noticing that there's a relationship between events. And I don't know why I do it, but a lot of the writing that I do just on the blog, in fact, I'm doing more writing on the Dave Asprey blog now, where I can talk about stuff that isn't collagen and coffee and MCTs and things. It's about, hey, I noticed this, and there's a rational reason, like there's a causative chain here. Maybe you would benefit from knowing that because no one told me this. And this is that passing on wisdom. And I love it to hear what you just said there, because I have the same experience. I mean, I'd like to eat the fried stuff, but even if I fry it at home in the best possible oils, it's still fried, it's still damaged. And I wake up the next morning, I'm like, wow, my grip strength is 20% below what it normally is. I feel a difference, because when you get used to feeling really good, you feel really good. And you can also look at yourself, look, do you want to be a high performance sports car? And if so, you keep the air pressure right in the tires, you use the good gas, and you take care of it, right? And if you want to be the beater pickup truck, like, okay, it never runs very well, and the steering's always been loose, and it usually stops when you put the brakes on, right? And if that's the bar you set for yourself, you probably can eat more crap, and you'll probably feel like crap more often, and you just get used to running at 60% of what you're capable of. and that becomes the normal. And what I found is that I keep thinking I'm at a new level and like, this must be it. And you go, oh wait, there's more. And then you get into things like neurofeedback. I run 40 years of Zen. I started a clinic, hired neuroscientists, built custom hardware and software for changing, not for treating diseases, not for treating abnormalities, but for finding, identifying, and accelerating the altered states of high performance. Because let's face it, performing really well is not average. It is an altered state. What I found there was very interesting from a superhuman anti-aging perspective. If I give people the right foods, the right mitochondrial enhancing substances, the supplements that I formulate and manufacture, they can do 2.5 times more deep personal development meditation work with computers guiding them than if they don't do any of that. They come in eating their fried foods and whatever they eat. They simply don't have the mental and cognitive resilience to dig deep and reprogram the voice in their head. And who would have thought? So even willpower itself comes from subcellular biology, comes from what we eat, comes from how our cells work. More ability to make electrons from food and air equals more willpower equals more ability to change yourself.
Well, it's a super exciting time in wellness and the ability for people to try and share their experiences. And the book is just such a great outline for helping you find the tools in your toolbox that help address the root issues that are there, because everybody's dealing with these different root issues and factors. And whether you want to live to 180, that's somebody's goal. Whether somebody just wants to live better within whatever their framework is, whether there's vanity metrics, and there's a whole section inside of there that is really exciting about gray hairs.
Oh yeah.
If people have them or want to talk about addressing those. There's a lot of different approaches that can guide you down the journey to figure out what's useful to you. But I think the real core message that I took away from the book is that it's possible. There's people out there that are doing it. And a lot of this stuff is just, even the idea of like going back to my experience, not eating fried foods and seeing that effect that it has in your body, that didn't cost me anything. It probably saved me money.
And I mean, if people are watching the video, if they look at you, and can you zoom in? Can you zoom in on his face? I cannot. Oh man. All right. So here's the deal. You're 36. Okay. You have 37, right? You have really good skin, right? And I mean, I can tell I've done this anti-aging thing for a long time. Like you look at the wrinkles around your eyes, I can tell you eat the right kinds of fats. You don't eat a lot of fried food because your skin looks like someone who actually eats good stuff. And you mentioned you've had cystic acne. So it looks like you might have some scarring somewhere, but it's not apparent because you look around your eyes, you look at your forehead, you actually look like someone who eats good fats and doesn't eat bad fats. And part of the big thing in Superhuman, the whole big thing about food pharmacy, the big thing about all of the stuff that we're working on is that, look, stop doing the stuff that harms you. Stop that first. And then do all the crazy fancy stuff that's better. And you're the walking example there. By not doing something bad, you actually got good skin.
If you're looking to upgrade everything about your life, make sure to check out the video right here. And while you're at it, hit subscribe below.